Welcome back.
To the Tiny Bookcase. I'm Ben.
And I am Nico. What you're about to hear is an interview.
A damn good one, too. Prepare to learn.
If you enjoy hearing this guest talk, be sure to check out last week's episode where you can hear their story.
Ours, too, if you're so inclined.
So, without further ado,
On with the show. Let's start asking some questions and we'll see where they go.
All right. Oh, we're getting to the questions. Okay, I'm going to open the beer then.
Oh,
That's
is it
good.
coming? Excellent.
Oh, while I'm doing this, it's super quick, but Bletchley Park, my favourite anecdote, we did the guided tour. My favourite anecdote about Bletchley Park is the two people who served there in separate offices for the entire war, man and woman, and then met each other outside of Bletchley Park later, were married for 30 years, I want to say, 30, or may have even been 40 years, and then discovered when they both went to the reunion that they both worked at Bletchley Park.
That's bonkers. Oh,
They kept
wow.
it secret from each other for 40 or however long it was, 30 or 40 years. And then they both lied to each other to sneak away to go to the reunion. And that was the moment when they discovered they were, because they worked in separate, and there was so much secrecy that because they worked in separate areas of the park, they never met each other.
That's amazing. I love that
Just-
story.
Ah, wonderful. Anyway, sorry. I've now got my beer, so ask away.
Excellent. So Kit, what's the first book you remember reading?
It's a really banal answer, I'm afraid. So I was taught to read on my mum's knee when I was very young. She started teaching me to read at 2 because she was adamant that she wanted me to know how to read before I got to infant school. It was really important to her. She was a teacher herself, and she quit teaching when she had kids, but she was, it was something that mattered to her. She felt that reading was basically the key to learning, and therefore I had to have it under my belt. So I was reading, the books were called Peter and Jane, and I remember reading Peter and Jane, and Peter and Jane and Balls, and then later on there may have been Hoops. There may have been a paddling pool, but I suspect I'm actually imposing that after the fact. I doubt they did anything quite that exciting.
I mean, from what we spoke about earlier during the stories, and obviously now with that remembrance, it sounds like you've got a phenomenal memory for very early things.
What's weird is that wasn't my prepared answer, because I did know this question was coming.
Right.
It wasn't until I started talking that I realised that was the truth. The answer I was going to give originally was Jack and the Beanstalk. And the reason that's an early memory of reading is because that book, and the fact of the story is incidental, but I was 6 or 7, I think 6, and I'd read, but I'd read out loud. And I had this copy of Jack and the Beanstalk, which was like for people aged 10 or 11. So I was already kind of getting ahead of the curve in terms of what I could do. But I'm reading it out loud to my teacher, and I will never forget this. The teacher just looked at me and said, "Now try reading it in your head." And I remember this, it felt like a physical click in my brain. It was the most amazing thing when I realized I didn't have to verbalize it. I could just read it, and it was there in my head. And I have a very vivid memory of the feeling of that moment. And it was Jack and the Beanstalk. I just remember it was Jack and the Beanstalk because it was Jack and the Beanstalk. But obviously the story, who gives a shit? The point, it was some Ladybird book. But the point is, it was that moment of like, oh my God. Like, oh, it's happening in my brain now.
I can just do this inside.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
and like within like seconds, my reading speed obviously like quadrupled, right? Because I didn't have to read it out loud, and that was it, man. I was off to the races.
Oh,
it was,
brilliant!
Yeah,
that feeling of like getting your running shoes on with reading.
Yeah,
it's really special. Like I guess it's sort of a big element of this question. Do you have that moment, Nico? Like that kind of bit where you were like, oh, I'm going to be doing this a lot and fast.
It was. I know I liked reading books, but my mum came home with a big box of books that her boss had given her that were all, and I think I've spoken about this box before, like Star Trek novels and Star Wars, but there was a Star Wars encyclopedia in there. There was some Terry Brooks sort of Shannara stuff in there, and just bought this big box of books that I was way too young for home, and I started flicking through them, and they were so much more engaging and exciting than any of that, Biff, Kipper, and Chip bollocks they give you at school.
Oh God, my kid had to go through them. She had to endure them to get to the good stuff. I was so
That's
angry
horrible.
about it.
But I just remember reading those books and wow, really cool stuff can happen in books.
Yeah.
I like these a lot. I did keep
Bonkers,
reading the
isn't
Beano for some time after that though, because
Well,
that's lit.
yeah. Well, yeah. I just think that's the thing about being a British child. I think that's unavoidable. I think it was Alan Moore, wasn't it, who made the joke about you just get handed the Dandy and the Beano like rickets if you're a working class kid. That's what you get, and it's just there. But it's interesting. I mean, I listened to the episode you did with Simon Bestwick, and I did. Doctor Who books were an early passion for me, for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't have a television until I was 8, I think, 7 or 8. So my first experience of Doctor Who was through Terrance Dicks, and I still think he's one of my biggest influences as a writer. I still think he's a massively underrated prose writer. He's one of the all-time great hack writers, and I say hack as a compliment.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
A massive compliment, because he wrote those things. He could write one of them in a bank holiday weekend.
Yeah.
And they were just phenomenal. They were so good. His character sketches. I still go back and read Terror of the Autons and Revenge of the Cybermen. Revenge of the Cybermen, by the way, much, much better than the TV version. I mean, almost infinitely better, because it's got an infinitely bigger budget for
I
starters.
was going to say about the limitations of BBC Wales. You could achieve anything.
Yeah.
Doctor Who, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. But I still go back to them, and the thing that really jumps out at me, especially Autons, is the character sketches. He'll get you someone in 200 words, and you know this person. And it's a combination of he knows how to lean on stereotypes, but then just putting it's the delicate brushstrokes of telling details. And you only need a couple of them, and you build the entire personality out of those broad strokes, and then those 2 or 3 little detail points. It's phenomenal writing. And you don't notice any of that when you're a kid. You're just enjoying it for what it is. It just zips along. And then the book that blew the doors off was Stephen King's It, which I read when I was 11. And that changed everything. Because that was the moment I realized just there were no limits on what you could do in fiction at all. There were no limits. There were no rules. And you could write for 1,000 pages, and you could murder children, and you could have a monster that is literally whatever you're most afraid of, and the adults can't see, and it just changed everything.
That man can tap into something very scary inside virtually everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating, because I heard someone else saying this on a podcast recently, sort of sound like I'm nicking their words, but I have said it before independently. I think Stephen King is our generation's Dickens. I'm trying to remember who else I heard. Oh, Brian Keane. I heard Brian Keane say that on an interview recently. But I promise you, I came up with the thought independently. He is, and people will be reading him in 100 years, not for the horror, but for the way he captures time and place.
Yeah.
That's what makes his work. It's timeless because it's perfectly dated. Weirdly.
Yeah. And also so prolifically as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's not just a one-off or even like a trilogy massive hit or something. It's consistent in different ways, told in different styles. It's absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm a huge fan of that kind of writing. Like, I love I do bedtime reading with my kid, and we've just done the entire Sherlock Holmes short stories. Because Doyle was a hack writer. He was writing. Yeah. He was paid by the word and writing a short story a month for years.
If you pay people by the word, guess what? They write more words.
They write more words. But also, weirdly, with Doyle, there are a few of those short stories where you also get the other thing where you feel like he suddenly hit his word count, and there's no third act. It's hilarious. There's at least a couple of the stories where it's just like, and then the boat sank and the baddies died at the end, and it's like, oh, okay, hit your word count, did you, Arthur? Fair enough.
Definitely pushing a deadline or something like that, yeah.
Watson, a letter.
Yeah.
It says who did it and why and when.
Yeah. No, there is this one, like the 5 orange pips, and you really think it's setting it up to be Sherlock Holmes versus the Clan, and it's going to be this amazing thing, and it's just like, but the boat sank, so they died. The end. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we're done with that story.
reminds me of the I don't know if you guys have watched any Frasier.
Yes.
You watch Frasier? There's an episode where they do like a radio play, a haunted, like a murder mystery, and
Right.
it becomes so frustrating that one of the people just immediately solves it with all the balloons as just gunshots, just killing off all the characters very quickly. And it's brilliant. It's a really, I mean, Frasier's fantastic. It's probably one of my favorite. I think it's probably number 2 sitcom
Nice.
underneath Always Sunny, I think.
Right.
Well, so that question got deep, didn't it? I like that one.
It's this one is not going anywhere near as deep. I don't think.
Okay.
Get ready for a shallow question.
Oh,
Okay.
From a shallow.
It feels that feels obscurely like a challenge, but I'll try not to rise to it.
Kit, what is your
Yes.
secret talent that few people know about?
See, this is the problem. I basically, because I don't have that many talents, the ones I have, people tend to know about because I tend to make a big deal out of them because I haven't got many. So I like to show off. So yeah, I don't think I was racking my brains on this one, and I don't really think I have. I mean, I was, I don't sing in a band, but I used to. But I was in a band, so people do know about that, and the information's out there. The songs are out there. It's not really a secret talent.
This doesn't need to be an impressive talent, by the way. We've had people touching the ends of their noses with their tongues and being able to whistle and growl at the same time. This can be anything you like, really.
I can do that weird double jointed thing with my thumb. I don't know if that's. Probably not many people know about that. I don't know.
I guess it depends if you use it in some applicable way.
Not really. To gross my daughter out, or maybe.
yeah, there we go.
2 coins at once.
I just like this. I have now got this image of you sort of unhinging your thumbs to write quicker.
I thought you
can nice.
An antelope for some reason, like a snake's jaw.
Well, I'll tell you a secret. Okay, so the secret talent I've got, and it's a secret because I'm actually not very good at it, but I'm just good at enough to fool my daughter, is I can do really, really basic palming magic tricks with coins, but I can literally only do them well enough to fool. Well, actually, I haven't tried them lately. It probably wouldn't anymore, but certainly I could fool a 6-year-old. When she was little, I used to do little palming magic tricks for her, and nobody else, because it would not have passed adult muster as magic, but she was enthralled. Kids are awesome, by the way. I just want to put that out there, and that is one of the ways in which kids are completely awesome.
I'm getting that vibe, man. Every time you talk about it.
Yeah, oh god, she's the best. But it is like, I cannot tell you the level of affirmation you get when you do the shittiest coin trick in the world, and you half fumble the conceal, and the kid's jaw just drops. Where's it gone, Daddy? Like, that is just the best fucking feeling in the world.
Oh, I guess it's good to be self-aware of it, though. So it doesn't get to the point where they're 15 and you're still doing it, and they're just now that's turned into like a humouring.
I am counting the seconds until the Kevin the teenager thing happens, and she just disappears off into a bedroom for 4 years to cocoon. Like, it's any day now it's going to happen, but
slide under the door.
Well, just I was talking about the bedtime reading. We're still doing that, and we just finished Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. So we're getting into some really good stuff now, and I really am like, she's all like, well, what are we going to do next? And I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, like, how much longer am I going to get away with this? How much longer is she conceivably going to want me to sit here and read stories to her? Like, have I got a year? Maybe 12, maybe. And then you start thinking, okay, so what do you want to read? Like, what are the ones you really want to get done? So, yeah.
There's that big moment where, at least this happened for me, where the child reaches over and just is like, well, you're going too slow. I need to read this. That happened to me with I think it was the third Harry Potter book. What's it? Prisoner of Azkaban?
Right. Yeah,
something.
Yeah.
I was just like, this is ridiculous. This pace is ridiculously slow. I don't care for your voices, mother.
The pressure that's going to be on us when we have Spawn, Ben. Because we have so much story reading experience now.
That's true, yeah. If you suck at it, there's no excuse.
Yeah,
you better not stink at it.
Talking to my infant. Look, you're going to have to wait for me to edit it, okay? The take wasn't great.
Well, look, But this is kids. Like my kid thinks I'm great at accents, and that's because she's never heard someone do accents properly. So she actually thinks I'm good at. I'm like, I am terrible at accents. All my Americans sound like the Texans. I could just about do a Northerner because I had to do a Northerner in a play when I was at college, and I had to spend an entire like term of college speaking in Yorkshire. So I can just about. It wouldn't fool a Yorkshireman for a second, but I can just about do a Yorkshire accent.
We're just wandering around saying "What's up, Chuck" to people.
Yeah, pet. I called a lot of
Yeah,
people
pet. Yeah,
pet,
yeah.
and a up. That was the other thing I said quite a lot.
Ayo.
But and like weirdly Australian. I don't know, just for some reason Australian clicked with me. But and Cockney because I am a Cockney, so that's cheating. But that's it. What's that like 4 accents or like 3.5 really? She thinks I'm amazing. You do all the voices. It's so great. And it's like, oh, kid,
Amazing.
don't ever grow up and learn how crap your dad is at this shit.
So you can't read your kids Lord of the Rings anymore though, because if you're not film accurate, you ruined it for them.
I mean, if you're not
show
off
them it, and they
book
go,
by
well,
the time,
you don't sound like Gandalf. What have you been playing out all these years?
I flatter myself that my Ian McKellen's not terrible. It probably is, but I flatter myself that it isn't. I'm doing okay in McKellen, but yeah, it's cool. It's really great. It's really magic, and it is that thing I like. I hope that in years to come it doesn't retroactively become cringe. That's the only thing you slightly worry about. But yeah.
I think if you always leave nothing out there, then if you just go for it in everything you do, there's there's never any cringe when you look back at it because you did your best. Like that's how I feel about pretty much everything in life, and that's definitely how I'd approach that. And it sounds like you do too, which is really awesome.
I think you do. I think your regrets are always more the things that the chances you didn't take them once you did. Most of the time,
Yeah. Well, so like we spoke about Stephen King and various other books, but do you have a favorite story? It doesn't have to be a particular book or anything like that. Just this, the concept of a story.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because when I first thought about this question, I did think about it because it does loom so large. It's such a seismic thing, but it's not really one story. It is actually a ton of stories woven together. It's actually really a patchwork of short horror stories woven together. I realized the last time I read it, which is not to diminish or take away from it. That actually, I think, adds to the brilliance of it. But I think my favorite story is one that I first read in an ancient sci-fi and fantasy. I'm going to say magazine, but like the old sort of, they were like A5, I guess, and they were like books, but
I think when they were called like, weren't they zines or
Zines,
like
yeah.
like yeah.
But like, yeah, but you like, I mean, there were the old Reader's Digest magazine was the same size, but you'd get these in the 50s, you'd get these 40s and 50s, you get these pulp ones, and they'd be science fiction and fantasy and all that kind of stuff. And my dad had like 2 or 3 of these lying around in the house, and I picked them up, and I always bounced really hard off the sci-fi because it was always too dense for me. It was always too ideas driven. Like it was the Asimov stuff, and like I could tell it was good, but I could also tell it as a kid, it just, my brain couldn't click with it. So I was flicking through this scene, and it was my memory is it was the last story in the book. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's my memory. Is it was right at the back was this short story called That Hellbound Train by Robert Bloch, and I think it's probably the perfect short story. I think it's just wonderful. I love Deal with the Devil stories. Deal with the Devil stories. It's my favorite subgenre of horror. It's a really odd subgenre. You don't ever get an anthology of Deal with the Devil stories, but most horror writers will take a crack at one sooner or later. King's done a couple of wonderful ones. He did a collection of novellas recently relatively recently called Full Dark No Stars, and 3 of them are, I think, basically non-supernatural jet black crime stories. Really, there's one about a woman getting horrendously sexually assaulted and then getting revenge. There's another one about, like, they're really bleak, dark stories. But I think it's the 3rd story in a collection called Fair Extension, and it's actually not a novella. It's a short story. It's only a few thousand words, It's just one of the best things he's ever done, and it is a deal with the devil story. Of course, Needful Things is as a novel is
Yeah.
kind of a giant deal with the devil kind of thing, and I think Needful Things is I think that doesn't get nearly enough love in the King canon. I think it's an absolute classic, and a black comedy actually as well, which I think a lot of people maybe don't miss about that novel. But anyway,
I mean,
It's such an interesting talent to be able to insert comedy into those kind of subject matter pieces.
you see, it's an interesting thing. There is definitely a relationship between comedy and horror. And actually, as I discovered when I interviewed Chuck Tingle for Ginger Nuts of Horror, it also applies to erotica, which had never occurred to me because I've never written or indeed read erotica, but it makes immediate sense. It's about tension and release. It's about build up
Yeah,
and payoff.
yeah, yeah.
And all three of those, comedy, horror, erotica, they all follow that pattern. They're all about. I mean, the short story I wrote that is a joke. That is a punch. You know, the punchline is, and now I'm going to sledgehammer your leg.
Yeah,
But it is,
yeah.
but it is a punchline, right? It's delivered as a punchline.
You know, I think I know why that creeped me out so much now. Now that you just said it like that, I think it's because I watched Misery far too young.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Like, just all this talk about childhood memories and this and horror movies when you're young, and you just kicked a memory into place in my head then when you said that. That's amazing. Oh, um,
That's
but
a
yes,
trauma, man. That
yeah,
scene.
sorry, yeah, trauma, yeah.
and I'm
Sorry,
Nico,
I
and you're
misspoke.
listening to the Record Trauma podcast.
And yeah, it's about a writer as well being forced to a deadline. Oh my god, it's all coming in. Oh,
Oh, you don't want to go in that cabin trip
misery is.
in December
Oh,
anymore, Ben.
yeah.
that is one of the greats, though. I mean, it's a great movie, and that scene is just. I mean, it makes me sweat when I watch it every time, and I've seen it a lot of times now, and it's still that you don't get inured to it. You can't build up a resistance to it. The effect work is so perfect, and the actors are so good. It never gets any easier to watch. It's a fantastic bit of cinema. But anyway, that Hellbound Train by Robert Bloch is a deal with the devil story, and it's difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very old and it's been republished a million times, but I still don't want to spoil it for anyone that hasn't read it because it is quite old and a lot of people won't. But it really is perfect, and there's a subgenre of deal with the devil stories that I don't want to name because it will spoil the ending, but it's one of those, and I think it's just the best one of those, which makes it one of the best stories. And it's funny, I haven't read it even that often, but I don't feel like I need to. It's one of those that I read it just the right, it imprinted on me, you know. And what's interesting is like it's not dark particularly. It's not particularly horrific, although it has the devil in it. It's very much. It's really an allegory about life, and it's really a meditation about happiness and satisfaction and what that means, and the kind of the relationship between happiness and impermanence and the nature of time. And it does all of this and tells a person's life story in maybe 4,000 words, maybe 3.5.
Okay.
Well, you've sold me. I'll be looking it up for sure.
I mean, it's free. You can get the it's
Absolutely.
as I say, it's long out of copyright now, but it's a stonker. It's just and look, it may well be that there are better versions of the story out there that I've never read, and it may well be, you know, that's entirely possible. But at that age, at that moment, again, it's that thing of like, and this is a wonderful thing. You see this again when you have kids. You see them do this. It's when you discover something and you've never seen anything like it. Like you didn't even know it could exist. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it blows all the doors off at once, you know. And that's one of those. So yeah, that's my pick today. Might be a different answer tomorrow.
Well, I think if I remember, I will make sure we'll put up a post linking that story if I find a good version of it online.
Yeah.
So those listening can go and read it now if they want to.
Let's flip the script. Let's do the thing. Because I always, I want to bring it back to sadness. I really enjoyed last week's episode, so I think I'm going to bring it back to the negative, as is my way.
Nice.
Can you think of a book or a style of book that doesn't work for you at all? And why is that the case?
Oh, that's really interesting. That's an interesting question. So I guess I'll start. I'll start with my thesis statement, which is that if you take any style, any genre, any subgenre of anything, whether it's music or art or literature, um, the top 5% of any of it is going to be worth your time. That's my baseline assumption.
Yeah.
You know, like, and depending on your taste, that percentage can shrink or grow. So, like, if it's rock or metal, I'll probably like the top 30% because I just inherently like rock or metal. If it's pop, I'll probably only like the top 1%.
Mm.
But you know what I mean? Like, when quality gets high enough in any genre, in any subject matter, then the very, very best stuff will be worth your time. And that's kind of my basic philosophy. So, like, I've never read romance and it doesn't attract me as a genre, but I'm perfectly willing to believe that the top 1% genre of romance novels would leave me in tears and change the way I think about the world. So, because that's what good art always does. So, that's my caveat to everything I'm about to say, right? Which is like, I believe that to be true. But in terms of stuff that doesn't work for me, I think I'm going to have to be a bit of an old fart here and say that kind of cinema, I don't think movies are as good as they used to be. That's a huge blanket statement. I mean, on average. And I think I'm particularly thinking about popcorn cinema. But I'm excluding the Marvel Cinematic Universe because I think that's done something very different and very special, and it's flawed in all kinds of ways. But I think it's actually achieved what it set out to do remarkably well, and I think it's one of those that I think it's actually going to be looked back on more fondly than it's been treated at the time in some ways because it's an incredible achievement. I don't think anyone's done anything like that in cinema before, and I like innovation, even if I have issues elsewhere with how it's been implemented, if you like. But I hate this because I feel ancient when I say this. I just feel like a grumpy old man shaking my fist at the cloud. But like, I've had so many disappointing experiences at the cinema over the last decade, you know, and it really upsets me because I fucking love cinema. I love movies so much, and it's not universal. And I don't want to give that impression at all. There are still amazing filmmakers out there making absolutely incredible films. But I do feel that it's not been a good decade really for cinema, and I don't know if that's because like with music I've accepted I'm just too old to listen to new music anymore, so I'm just going to listen to the stuff that I liked. I think I stopped buying new music around 2001, and now I'll continue to buy the new Queens of the Stone Age album and I'll buy the new Bruce Springsteen album, but I'm not investing in new bands because I'm too old, and that's fine. And I accept that's not right or wrong. Huh?
I said, well, thank you very much.
But exactly, which is like, look, I'm putting my hands up, okay? I'm old, and I've just accepted that that's where I've got to in my life, and I'm not going to beat myself up for it.
You just absolutely atted me with that Queens of the Stone Age, and then thinking that makes you old.
I know it sucks.
Yeah.
Well, look, I remember in 1999, I was queuing because I was living in London. I remember queuing outside Oxford Street, HMV, for 4 hours to get my copy of the debut Slipknot album signed by the band.
Oh, that's so cool.
Like, and I've still got that, that original gatefold release of Slipknot's debut on CD signed by the entire band, and it is one of my most treasured possessions. Yeah. So and that makes me old. And if that resonates with you, I'm sorry, but it makes you old as well. Yeah. And that's just face it. That's how it is. But yeah, I think for me that's it. I don't know. There's something about I think it's something to do with pacing. I think and it's a weird thing because Spielberg's later filmography is inconsistent for me. He's still capable of brilliance, but he has put out a couple of stinkers and a couple of so. So I don't know what it is, but I just feel like in the 80s and 90s there was a baseline level of competence in terms of pacing that we seem to have lost completely. And they're either cut like an MTV video so I can't follow what's going on, or it's just devastatingly slow or lumpily paced. And it bugs the hell out of me. And God, I'm just an old man. Stop me from talking, please.
But also, like, just to jump in on that there, a big thing that's been happening because of stuff like the MCU is that everything's trying to be a fucking franchise, and so you end up with movies that have no business trying to be a franchise, adding 20 minutes to the end of their bloody movie where they undo the resolution that they just spent nearly 2 hours doing in order
Yeah.
to set up a possible sequel. And everything's just, it feels like, not everything, it's a massive generalization, but those kinds of movies have definitely begun to feel like a waste of time because they specifically undo the
Yeah.
ending that they work towards in order to try and get a second movie.
I
And
tell you what, what's really interesting about that is you made me think of something I remember reading 3 or 4 years ago about publishing. There was someone doing a long thread, I can't remember where, it could have been Twitter, could have been Facebook, but asking for advice about what do you look for, what should be in your pitch letter, to agents. It was that kind of a thing, and the bit of advice that I remember that came through most strongly from that entire thing was someone said, the line you must include in every single pitch letter to either publishers or agents is, about your novel, you must say, a standalone story with series potential.
Mm.
That is the phrase that they are all looking for.
Yeah.
That's what everybody wants. Sorry, go on.
I think with this, and it's happening in music, in film, and in a big way as well in literature, is we've reached this kind of point of homogeneity where there's so much being produced and it's so much easier to make. You go back to the 80s and the 90s, you're filming on reel-to-reel manual film. It costs a lot of money to make a movie. You get the advent of the digital camera, and all of a sudden anyone can make a film. And it becomes cheap to make film. And more people want to make film, and there are more film schools. And all of a sudden, the things that sell, companies want, because that's end line. And the same with music. This single, we only need this person to be famous for 3 months.
Yeah.
So we'll write them a song. They've got big eyes and they're handsome or pretty or whatever you choose, whatever the flavor of the month is, and they'll be the figurehead for this. And it's not about the music; it's about the brand. And film is very similar, and it means that in the same way that some of my favorite bands I found because I happen to be in a different town, maybe because we're just away for the weekend, or we've played a show the night before, and I've gone into a bar and I've heard a band. And I thought, oh, I love this. My favorite film that I saw last year was because, and another Google adventure, Ben and I were trying to find a movie to watch, and I Googled comedy films you've never heard of but should have seen. And we found a great movie called Thunder Road.
Okay.
And it is one of the best movies I've ever seen. It is a
it was
breathtaking, harrowing character exploration. Raw. And it's the love child of one man, really. It started as a short that he shot. And that became the intro to the movie when someone said, you have to make the rest of this.
Yeah.
And
it's directed, written, and starred Jim Cummings. Jim Cummings is the the guy. It's very good.
It's those little glimpses that do give me hope, and movies like Parasite that someone out there is letting people make these great movies, and you do have to sift through some stuff. And I'm pretty open about the fact that I love bad movies, and there is a distinction between movies that aren't good and bad movies. Bad movies where, they're really putting their heart and soul into it, but all they can afford for the guts is red cabbage. I love those kind of movies. But that kind of dead, bloated end of cinema where, well, car chases are in because of the Fast and the Furious, so we'll make Need for Speed, and we'll make Turbo 12, and we'll make Super Zoom Zoom Car Time movie. Like, it's just a marketing exercise for the most part.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because my mind's going in like a million directions at once. But like, there's one thing that's interesting about is that is true, but it is also true that if you don't have the story and the chops to back it up, you don't get anywhere. Because I can't stop thinking about the DC cinematic universe and how, I know it's financially doing okay, but compared to MCU, it really has fallen on its arse quite badly.
Repeatedly,
and I think.
As well.
Yeah, and repeatedly. No, that's a really good point. Like, it's been consistently bad, I think. I actually watched Batman versus Superman twice because I couldn't believe how bad it was. Like, I really couldn't. And that sounds like, I know how obnoxious that sounds, but I was genuinely stupefied. Because there's so much effort and money and talent. There's a lot of very talented people involved in the making of that film. And I was just floored by it. I was just like, how? did this happen? You know?
The difference is, and specifically with Marvel and DC and how they've tried to build their movie worlds, is that when Marvel drop a clunker, they take a note, and it's like a sketch
Yeah.
pad. Turn to the next page and they start drawing again, remembering that they did the hands wrong in the last one.
Right,
Whereas
right,
for
right, right.
DC, it feels like when they get something wrong, they set fire to the sketch pad, get a new sketch pad, and say, "What are you talking about? I never did any drawings before. Look at my new drawing. Isn't it shiny?"
You know,
And
the great example for that is the Thor movies. You look at the 3 Thor movies and you
yeah,
see exactly that in action. It's a perfect illustration. The first one, Thor's great, but there's just not enough conflict. It's just too much character building. The second one, loads of conflict, better villain, better stakes, but it's a bit of a mess and it's not entertaining enough. And then they do Ragnarok and they pull it all together. And Ragnarok's
Yeah.
probably the standout. It's probably the jewel. Well, that or Black Panther. Like the jewel in the crown of the entire series, in my view.
Yeah,
And that's
Ragnarok
the
for
one
sure.
where they learn all the lessons from the first 2 movies. They pull everything that made them right. They ditch everything that didn't work, and bang, you've got like a fantastic bit of cinema.
Bookended by auteurs as well. That trio, like you've got all the Dutch
Mm.
angles of Kenneth Branagh in the first one, and then of course Taika
Right.
Waititi's particular style in Ragnarok. It's fantastic. Just before we move on, you mentioned this idea of the proliferation of mass media with the digital this idea of digital filming,
yeah,
Mm.
and you've got to think that when the printing press came around, there were a lot of people being like, "Oh God, anyone can write a book now." Do you know what I mean?
Well,
But eventually, you get to a point where there's a real the standard. There's always going to be some dross in something where everyone can do it, and maybe we just got to accept that we're at a point where it's possibly reached its worst. Its nadir, and now it's going to start coming back up again. Hopefully.
it's not the dross that bothers me, funnily enough. And it's. I mean, I was thinking about what you were saying. I mean, technology has completely. I mean, disrupted's too strong a word. I think there's been a complete revolution in the creative arts over the last sort of 15 years, thanks to the digital revolution. It's affected all of the art forms. Music, literature, and filmmaking. Filmmaking is now possible for anyone with a digital camera, which is anyone with a phone in their pocket. Literature is now accessible to anyone who has an Amazon account and wants to upload it, which is anybody. And similarly with music. I mean, Napster destroyed the music industry, but it did also democratize access to files, and now, of course, streaming services are doing the same thing. I mean, there's a couple of things. What's fascinating to me is Amazon are a company I have profound issues with in terms of their ethics and the way they conduct their business and the warehouses and all that kind of stuff. But at least if you publish through Amazon, you get paid. Whereas if you're a musician using Spotify, you get completely hosed by the way it's quote unquote monetized. Like it's the same digital distribution model if you think about it, down to Kindle Unlimited, where people subscribe to Amazon every month and they can read as many KU books as they want, and the authors get paid by the page read. And yet the rate you get paid by the page is so many times better than the rate you get per song download. So that's really weird. I mean, that's just at the whim of the individual companies. But it's fascinating to me how that has democratized art, which I have to be in favor of as a lefty, right? That's got to be like, if I'm not in favor of that, what am I in favor of? Like, what's wrong with you? But it's weird how it's happened through these kind of hyper capitalistic models that are brutally exploitative of the artists in most cases. And it's very weird that of the 3 that I was thinking of there in terms of digital photography and Amazon and Spotify, Amazon are actually the least exploitative comparatively of those 3 of the artists. That's a bit of a head fuck. Despite being one of the most exploitative companies on the planet in every other respect of their business.
Oh dear.
Very, very, and it's weird because like the plus side of it is suddenly there's all this shit everywhere, and there's some amazing work happening in the indie horror scene. I mean, that's just the tiny corner that I know about the indie horror scene. People are writing books that would never in a million years have been picked up by Big Five, and they are phenomenal. And especially works from people from previously marginalized communities. They're just saying fuck it, and they're writing it, and they're getting it out there, and some of that stuff will knock your goddamn socks off. It's phenomenal stuff. And sorry, Big Five, you snooze, you lose. but it's weird that it's happening through this system that is so awful.
Yeah.
And
I think
exploitative and damaging and planet killing. It's a very strange time to be alive, I think, is what I'm saying in
this,
conclusion.
yeah, this idea that people are just saying fuck it and writing it actually brings us really neatly to our next question, I think, which is talking. What is your process for saying fuck it and writing it? For whether it's flash fiction, short stories, novellas, novels, what actually happens when you sit down to write something? How do you go about it?
So there's two. I mean, I think there's two questions, right? There's the mechanics, and then there's the the mental process. But the mechanics are, I try and get a block of uninterrupted time. So what I was doing for a long time was saying, after I put the kid to bed and do the bedtime stories, I then sit and write for an hour, and then I hang out with the missus and we watch telly for a couple of hours before bed, right?
Hmm.
And that's not every night. That's 3 or 4 nights a week, and then if they are going out on Friday or Saturday or Sunday, if the pair of them want to go off for a couple of hours or, a weekend, happy days, I'll just plant my ass in the chair for a couple of days. So that's the mechanics of it. And then beyond that, I have to block the world out. So I have to listen to music.
Yeah.
And for me, what I've had to relearn over the years, it's weird. I learned it and then I forgot it, and now I've relearned it. I don't just have to listen to music. I have to listen to music that matches the mood of what I'm trying to write. I mean, I can give a concrete example of this briefly. I'm working on a novel at the moment with a friend of mine, and we're doing the edits, and we had to produce some new material, and I had a specific scene I had to write featuring an elderly character, and it was, I mean, I really don't want to go into it because it's very convoluted, but it was a very emotional scene.
Hmm.
And this particular character was kind of modeled on Peter Cushing playing Doctor Who. That was our kind of template for him,
Okay.
so that kind of figure. And I was really struggling to write what should have been, I don't want to say a simple scene. It wasn't a simple scene in terms of the emotion, but it was straightforward in terms of what I knew. I knew what I had to write. You know what I mean? Like, I knew what had to be conveyed in the scene. But I was struggling with it, and I was struggling with it until I realized the reason I was struggling with it was the dude was at a classical music concert and he was listening to Holst Planet Suite, and I was listening to Bruce Springsteen, and the mood was wrong, the atmosphere was wrong, and I was fighting against myself. So I just went to YouTube and put the Planet Suite, and the damn thing wrote itself in like maybe an hour, So that was I'm doing this on the show so that when I listen back to the podcast, I'll remind myself again, listen to the goddamn music that fits the mood of what you're trying to write, because otherwise you screw yourself up. So like my debut novel, God Bomb, set in 1995, and I wrote that entire novel listening to Rage Against the Machine, because that was the mood I needed to be in, and that was music from my childhood that meant a lot to me and got me into that frame of mind. So so that's the mechanics of it, right? Sit my ass, make the time, respect the time, and make sure the time is bounded. So I'm also respecting the time with my family, because that's got to come first. That's got to be the most important thing. And then beyond that, in terms of the brain space, though, that's the bit that's weird, because I don't feel like I have. I'm okay. Well, I'm a pantser. Let's start there. I don't plot out ahead of time most of the time. I just get an idea, I get an inkling, or more often I get a collision of ideas. And it's like I'll have an image, or I'll have a line, or I'll have I don't know, whatever, a scene, a character, but they're not connected to anything. So I just leave them, and then one of those pieces will collide with something else, and then suddenly then I've got an idea. And then I'll start writing.
A bit like alchemy, then, from the
I,
sound
I
of it.
just think it's I just think it's how I mean, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how I think we remember everything or nearly everything, but we can't access it. I'm a big believer in the power of the subconscious. I think that's where I'll speak personally. I think that's where most of my best writing comes from, is when I'm just getting out of my own way and letting my subconscious do the work, letting it pull up whatever it needs to pull up. Because like characters is a good example. Like I hear a lot of writers talking about how they struggle with characters, and they'll produce character diaries, and they'll describe their characters in journals, and they'll know what they wear and where they went to school and I mean, I respect the hell out of it, and everyone's got their own process, but that's just not me. That's not how it works for me. People just appear when I need them. It's the weirdest fucking thing. They just turn up. I mean, that thing, like I said, with the short story I wrote for tonight, like I knew what I wanted to do for that character, Like I knew what the story was. I knew that the structure of I'm going to run through this research of the bones, and I had a good idea. Funnily enough, before I did the research, I had an idea the femur was where I was going to end up. But I just trusted that the voice would come, that the character would tell me who he was as we went through, and that's kind of what happened. I got about halfway through, and I realised because I was using a lot of medical language, I was writing in a cultured way, and therefore he was going to be middle class, and that gave me this implication of that. And then it was like an interview question: does that work? Yes. And look, the other thing is, I'm an angry person. I've had to do an application form this week, and it's one of my least favorite things in the world to do for a job. So,
paper. Yeah.
so I'm sure like that's not subconscious, is it? Because I knew it. But you know what I mean? Like that's probably why it was a job interview that he was angry about.
Yeah.
Because because I don't like that whole process. I think it's horrible. But yeah, it's just so that's it really. It's just it's just collision of idea, and often I read Stephen King's On Writing. That's when I started becoming. That's when I decided to become a writer. When I read King's On Writing, and when I was sort of, I can't remember now, like 35, 36, something like that. And what he said was, because he's a pantser, he said, plot is what happens when character meets situation.
Yeah.
And I think for me, and again, other people have different processes. Other brilliant writers have different processes, and that's cool. But for me, that is exactly it. And I'm really lucky that for whatever reason, touch wood, so far, characters, they just turn up when I need them. So it's really about situation. What I need is that idea of what is the circumstance, what is the thing, and then just feed people in the meat grinder and see what happens, basically.
I think it sounds like a really exciting process that's very sort of fun to take part in as well. Like obviously it's serious because it's what you do, and you've done very well with it. But there is that joy of writing that Stephen King goes into in that book. I think everyone is told to read that book when they think that they possibly might want to be a writer or they're interested in it, and it's that recommendation is not wrong. That book is fucking great. Like it's really good. And people take different things from it as well, which means that it's not just sort of a rote thing.
Yeah.
I like that. I really liked that answer. It felt eerily similar to my own process, I would say, with getting the music to match the mood, the way that you pants it, the way that characters just appear, blocking out the time. It's for me, it sounds very similar. I've got to do all those things in order to be able to put together a story like the one that I read out earlier. And I think it's really encouraging when people start talking about it. We were talking about going under the hood at the start of the podcast. I think sharing those kind of experiences is just a really vital thing to do.
I mean, I actually wrote an essay about On Writing a few years ago now. For someone was doing a Stephen King project, and someone else had already grabbed it, and I was kind of bummed out, and I almost wasn't going to write, and then I was like, wait, has anyone done On Writing? Because I actually think I said earlier that I think King is our generation's Dickens. I stand by that, but I think On Writing will be his biggest legacy, because I think On Writing will have inspired tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people to write. I genuinely believe that, because it was the key for me. When he said, "Do you need permission to write? Very well, I give you permission to write." That it's a cliche, but it's true. That changed my life.
To be fair, though, he is in charge of that. That's what I was led to believe.
I needed to hear it.
Yeah, some
I
people,
needed to hear that, and I didn't know I needed to hear it.
Yeah,
but I did, and it changed my life, because I was like, okay, fuck it, sit your ass in the chair, see, fuck about and find out.
I mean, it's a psychological wall we've come up against, though. As podcasters, and even saying that as podcasters feels strange, but there was a period where I'm not a writer and I'm not a podcaster. What right do I have to talk to people about their work, to present my work to people? But as soon as you've written something and you've podcasted something, I'm not saying that you're a top tier one of either of those things, but
no,
buckle yourself in, honey. You're both of them.
And also like, I think there's this really, one of the things that I think we really screw ourselves up with, and I certainly include myself in that, is we forget that doing is learning and learning is doing.
Yeah.
They're inextricably linked. And actually, if you're doing it, you're learning it. But also, if you're learning it, you're doing it. Like that's it. That's it. You're doing it because you're doing it. And you're right. I mean, it's important to make that like, yeah, you may not be doing it at a world class level. You are almost certainly not, whatever it is. That's not the point. The point is you're doing it, and by doing it, you're also learning how to do it, and you will get better. Because I hit that same wall. I think 2 weeks after I found out about the nomination, which is by far so far is a career high point, no question. I mean, that's something that you would never dream. I had genuinely never thought was going to happen. It wasn't something that was ever on my radar. So it's an incredible honor. I had 2 short stories I really, really was very, very pleased with indeed get rejected in the space of a fortnight. And my confidence just cratered immediately.
Yeah.
And I had a whole sort of 2 or 3 weeks of like, what the fuck am I doing? Who am I kidding? You know? And you have to just go through that. And then you have to remind yourself, it says nothing about the quality of those stories. It's about the 300 stories that editor read and the 4 slots they've got and what they've got from the people that they'd already pre-commissioned and what's going to fit. And you could write the best goddamn version of the story that you wrote in the world. And if it doesn't fit in one of those 4 slots because of something somebody else did, you're out. And it's not a reflection on you. It's not a reflection on the quality of your work. It just didn't fit, you know?
Yes.
And that's it. And, you know, read it through, see if it needs a polish, send it somewhere else. Someone will have it, you know? But it is, you know, so like, and as I said, I mean, I had a conversation with the guy because the novel I'm writing at the moment is a co-authored thing. I mean, it's taken too long for various boring biographical reasons for both of us, but we got to the point with it where it's like, I was having this big conversation with him and it really set me straight. It was like, get out your own way. That's the most important thing in the world. Get out your own way. Stop overthinking it. You know, like, because when I wrote the first novella, I wrote Lifeline, I didn't have a goddamn clue what I was doing. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just had this idea. I had a single line. I had a guy tied up on the floor and a guy standing over him saying, "I've always wanted to torture someone to death," and that's all I had. But that was enough. You know,
it's a good
exactly,
start.
exactly.
Yeah.
That it was enough.
Yeah.
And I fucked about and I found out. You know, and it's like. It's really easy to overthink it. You get to a certain point, or I did anyway. I get to a certain point. I mean, I'm a mess psychologically. This will surprise no one who's got this far on the podcast. Like, I am a mess psychologically, and I have all kinds of weird things. And I have a very, very uncomfortable relationship with any kind of success of any kind. Again, for very boring biographical reasons. But the point is that, like, it's a weird thing. But like, having something good happen, I was kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and as soon as it did, I was like, yeah, there you go. That's it. You know, of course, it's a flash in the pan. It doesn't mean, you know, and it's like, again, like when I'm healthiest, when I'm at my best, is when I'm doing it because I love doing it. Because I'm driven to do it. It's the most fun I have with my clothes on. That's it. That's it. You know?
I'm not saying that Kit's good, Ben, but he's answered the next question without me even bloody asking it.
I know.
And not only answered the question, but then gone through how to deal with the answer to that question. God damn it, Kit.
Obviously, the question would have been: have you ever encountered adversity in pursuing your writing as a career? Which was very neatly answered.
You know what, though, I will say something else on that, if I may, very quickly, so this novel that I'm working on with my friend has taken far too long, and one of the reasons it's taken too long is we've both been through various kind of ridiculous situations in terms of our professional lives, COVID, all kinds of, you know, health scares with family, all kinds of bullshit.
It's been a hell of a time.
It has been a hell of a time. It's been a hell of a time for everybody, and it's not, you know, but one of the other things I would say that's really important that I am not good at, and I wish I was better at, is it is also really important not to beat yourself up. Like, it's really important because you will get knockbacks, you will get rejections, they will feel crap, and it's okay. All of that's okay. It's okay to feel crap when you get rejected. It's important to have the conversation with yourself about why it's happened, and it's important not to let it stop you. But it is also okay to feel how you feel. You know what I mean? In the moment.
Yeah.
I know I'm at my best when I give myself time to sulk. That was the mechanism, and I forget to do it, and then I mess myself up. But when I've got my head on straight, what I know to do is, depending on the scale of what's upset me, give myself anything between a day and a week to sulk. And sulking is do nothing. You know, just
Yeah.
cross your arms, eat shitty food, drink too much, and play Fortnite for 4 hours when you should be in bed. Sulk.
Nice. Yeah.
Proper sulk. And then set the period of time you're going to do that, and then get the fuck on with it. You know what I mean?
I think that's very good life
Give
advice.
yourself the time, but give yourself the time to feel it and process it. Don't pretend it's not happening.
Yeah.
Don't pretend it doesn't piss you off, because of course it does. You're a human being. Of course it does. Why wouldn't it?
You do
And I
feel
think
like
that
one of us. You really do.
Uh-huh.
You feel like one of us. You really do.
We've had similar conversations between Nico and I,
Right.
when one or both of us is down and the other one's up. You know, it's
Yeah.
so helpful having either one other person or a community of people around you that can just tell you when it's time to maybe stand the fuck up and get the fuck on.
Oh, you
You know what I
cannot
mean?
beat that. You
Yeah.
cannot beat that. I mean, I realize as we're talking, one of the reasons that I've struggled so much over the last few months is because the last 18 months of con seasons went completely by the board.
Yeah.
Now I only go to like 2 or 3 cons a year, but they are lifelines, those cons, because I see people I only see then,
Yeah.
and it's the tribe, because you know what it's like when you talk to people who aren't writers. They haven't got a clue what you're talking about. And you always either sound like a completely pretentious idiot or a nervous wreck or like a narcissist or a whatever. Like, because it's a weird business. It's a weird gig. Writing is a weird thing to do. And, FantasyCon, Edgelit, a couple of times a year, I get to be surrounded by people who I know just get it. They just get it on a bone. And we'll have different processes. We'll have different approaches. We work in different genres. We care about different things. We have different politics. But we understand this. We understand the weirdness of what we do,
Yeah.
and that is gold dust. That, and I only needed to do it a couple of times a year to keep my head on straight, but I have missed it so badly. And I'm so excited about FCon at the end of the month, man. I cannot wait.
I mean, that's got a double thing for you as well, hasn't it? There must be a certain amount of trepidation in awaiting the results of the award ceremony as well, perhaps.
Look, I mean, this is probably part of that weird psychological thing I was talking about earlier. But I genuinely am assuming I'm not going to win, because I've looked at the other nominees, and it's weird seeing my name on that list. And I don't mean that in a self-depreciating way. I mean, I'm incredibly proud of the nomination, and I'm really happy that novella got nominated as well, because I love that book. Like, I really do. I'm proud of it, and I poured a lot into it, and I like. I mean, I like the fact that a pulp horror novella is on the list.
Yeah.
Because it is a pulp horror novella, and I set out to write a pulp horror novella, and that I wrote one that was good enough to get on that list. Yeah, I'm fucking happy about that, man. I'd be insane not to be. But I also look at the company and think it's just not going to happen. I don't have any expectation. But you know what? I know how this sounds, but I don't care. The nomination is the honor. That is the thing, because it's like that means enough people who attend FCon and read, as widely as any group of people you're likely to meet, and know what the hell they're talking about. And many of them are professional writers or writing professionals or involved in the industry themselves. Enough of them got their hands on it and went, I want that one. You can't beat that. As a vote of confidence, you can't.
You can
Hello?
call it pulp all you like, Kit, but you said it yourself. Top 1% of anything.
Yeah.
Well, I don't use pulp as a pejorative. I think
No.
I think King's a pulp writer. I think Dickens was a pulp writer. I think Shakespeare was a pulp writer.
Oh, for sure.
Pulp's not a pejorative. Yeah.
He was Shakespeare was definitely playing to the pit.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think that's the good shit myself.
Yeah. Well,
I would say that though.
when done well and when executed well, which I think was what Nico was going for there.
Yeah.
This idea of like having the top 1% of it. So I think it's probably fairly clear which genre you'd pick. But if you had to pick a genre of fiction to keep, and all the others were just chucked out of the window, which would you choose?
Yeah, see, you'd think it would be obvious, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, but now I'm maybe I've
No, I'm
pre-answers.
gonna give the same answer RJ did. Crime,
Crime.
and for the same reason, it's the one I read the most.
Ah.
I I love horror, but I actually well, there's two things. I tend to read deep rather than wide. So I've read most of what King's put out. I've read most of what Barker's put out, and there's a few other people who I follow really closely. And then I've had to read more widely because of the work I do for Ginger Nuts of Horror, doing reviews and stuff. So I've got a better sense of what's happening contemporary now in horror than I used to. But for sheer for sheer ease of pleasure, it's crime. I love crime fiction. Um, it's it's comfort zone in a way that horror isn't. Horror by its nature, if it's done right, actually does disturb and agitate. And I love art that does that. And I love writing art that does. I love I love writing stories that do that. But um, if but I can't imagine a world without crime fiction. I can't imagine a world without that comfort zone that crime fiction offers me. I can't imagine a world without Kellerman and Elroy and Jim Thompson and I mean, look, there's a way in which I'm cheating because I think a good crime novel is also a good horror novel. I think that the genre boundaries are completely porous, and the only difference between good crime fiction and horror fiction is horror may contain a supernatural element.
Mm.
And I actually, the supernatural element of horror is the thing I'm least interested in horror. I'm not saying I dislike it, I don't mind it, but what I'm really interested in are the people and the circumstances. And you get that with crime. And yeah, so weirdly, although I adore horror and although I call myself a horror writer, I think crime's the one I couldn't do without.
I think it's a really good answer, and for all the reasons that you've given, but also this idea that we were speaking about earlier about the similarities between erotica and horror. This idea of tension and
Yeah.
release, the build of tension in a good crime book. Um,
Yeah.
it's very comparable, but in it obviously with a slightly different tone to it.
I mean, one of my perennial fascinations is about the gap between the way the world describes itself and the way the world actually is.
hmm.
And I think both horror and crime explore that more than any other genres. I think that's kind of the job of both horror and crime. But I think as a reader, it's the naturalism of crime that I really like, you know. And I also love stories about people put in situations where they've got no good choices. And I think that's kind of the essence of a lot of good crime fiction as well. But as I said, I do also think I'm cheating because I think Jim Thompson was a horror writer.
Yeah.
I think Ian Banks was a horror writer. You know, I think you could call those novels horror, but they don't. They call them crime, so I get to keep them. Ha ha ha.
If you do slide into writing crime, like RJ has RJ Dark, do you have a
Mm.
prepared crime name? And if not, can I suggest Kit Prowler?
Nice. After the AC/DC tune of the same name. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I have written most of my horror is non-supernatural.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could technically call God Bomb a crime novel, I guess. I mean, it's about an atheist suicide bomber. Does that make it a crime novel? I mean, he's committing a crime, certainly.
I read the blurb for this the other day when we were emailing, and I thought it sounded phenomenal.
Thank you.
Just a really, really good thing. I think just for the people listening, I think I'd actually quite like to read the back if I could.
Yeah, go for it, man. Yeah,
So,
please.
somebody wants answers. North Devon, England, 1995. A born again revival meeting in a public building. The usual mix of the faithful, the curious, and the desperate, and one other, an atheist suicide bomber. He's angry. He wants answers. And if God doesn't come and talk to him personally, he's going to kill everyone in the building. I think that isn't it great, Nico?
Oh yeah.
Like, I think that's um, a fantastic blurb. There's an art to writing a good blurb. Did you
Oh
write it out?
man, I had a hand in it.
Had a hand
I
in it,
I
yeah,
worked on it with the publisher. Yeah,
excellent.
yeah,
But I think what's good about it comes from the core concept of the book for
Yeah.
sure. So I think that's really exciting.
yeah. I mean, I think a good blurb gives you the core concept but doesn't really tell you anything.
Yeah.
That's the ideal. It makes you want to find out what the hell's going on. And I think they did the Sinister Horror Boys did a pretty good job on that one. Mission accomplished.
Definitely. Well, Nico gets to ask his favorite, well, one of his favorite questions.
It's up there for me now.
It's up there, yeah.
What is a quote you live by?
So I've talked a little bit already about my relationship with memory and how it's a bit of a Swiss cheese thing. So quotes are a bit of a problem for me, but I don't know who said it, which makes it a bit dodgy, but I think probably there's two. The first one is living well is the best revenge.
Classic.
A dig.
I never claimed to be a particularly nice person, and I think that that one helps me get a handle on my angst from time to time. That one helps me get a handle on my anger from time to time. There's a lot of things to be angry about in the world, I think, and I struggle with it sometimes. And that quote kind of brings me back to myself a bit. It makes me think like, okay, so what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
what you're going to do about it is live well. That's what you're going to do about it. And I genuinely think it's damn good advice if you can follow it. So there's that, and the other one is even more trite, and that's this too shall pass. And that is one that is a thing for all occasions. That's the thing for when you're at your lowest and when you're at your highest.
Yeah.
And it's useful, I think, as a centering thing, as a kind of like, because some days you don't feel they're going to end for good or bad reasons, but it always is, And it reminds me actually of kind of the essay, that we started the show with that you read. Those moments feel like they're going on forever when they're going on, but nothing's going on forever.
That strange human perception of time it's fascinating that we built this system of measurement that we can't actually maintain internally.
We are so fucking weird.
It's
Why?
pretty
How
classic
is it?
humanity, that, isn't it? It's just really, put yourself in the foot stuff.
We are the only, as far as we know, we're the only life form. I mean, as far as we know, we're the only life form in the fucking universe, actually, that is aware of its own mortality. And we all walk around and act like we're going to live forever. It's the weirdest goddamn thing.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. We need to start giving watches to dogs.
Fucking dolphins, man. What are they so smug about?
Just learn to speak dolphin and tell them they're going to die.
Tell them their lifespan's 20 to 40 years. See if they keep laughing. Fucking jumped up tuna fish. Yeah, deal with that shit.
If you're so clever, swim out of the net, dickhead.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Ooh, nice. Really hitting that dolphin lover community hard today.
Oh, Peter left the chat.
Right, okay, so we've talked about God Bomb, but where should people start? Like, so if they haven't read any of your stuff already, Kit, what should they start with? Where should they begin?
I think I go for either end. So the God Bomb's the debut, and actually at this point still only novel. I am very proud of it. I think it was a good first novel. I think it's a good first statement. If you like the sound of the premise from what was read out, I'd be happy to recommend that. I think it's as good a place to start as any. Alternatively, I think A Song for the End is also a strong contender if you want something a bit shorter as a novella, maybe dip your toes in. That is, I'm trying to think of a way of summing up A Song for the End. I mean, the basic premise is it's weird because I wrote it. It was written before COVID, and it was meant to be about the then very live political situation of Brexit, but it ended up actually being very clearly an epidemic novel. It's about a pandemic. It's about a viral spreading, and I'm saying that because I appreciate you may not be in the mood for that kind of fiction right now, and if not, that's fine. But if you are, I think A Song for the End would be a good place to start because it's really fun. It's really kind of high octane. It's high energy, and it's. I am proud of the core concept. The core idea of that novella, I think, is a strong one, and I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll have fun watching how the premise plays out. I certainly had fun writing it. So that's either of those ends. I think I'd start for the fiction. If you're interested in my short fiction, there's a beautiful collection called Voices, which got brought out by Black Shuck Books, and that contains 7 first-person narratives, so similar to the kind of thing you heard tonight. So if you enjoyed that and you want to hear more of that, Voices would be the way to go. They do these beautiful, I think they're only a fiver, these little paperbacks, or obviously you can get the ebook as you'd expect. If you're interested in my non-fiction work and essay work, then My Life in Horror Volume 1 is available in paperback and a gorgeous hardback edition, and they're available wherever books are sold, or there's an ebook. And if you want to read the essays, Ginger Nuts of Horror is the website, gingernutsofhorror.com, and then My Life in Horror's got its own area on the left-hand side. There's about, as I said, there's over 50 essays there now on just everything. John Carpenter's The Thing, Wasps, the Headless Children album, Iron Maiden getting the #1 but Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter, 9/11, Antichrist Superstar, just all kinds of stuff. So yeah, fill your boots really, and that's free. So hey,
Absolutely.
why not check that out?
Fill your boots.
We'll definitely tweet some bits out.
Oh yeah. I'm sure people will be able to find them on their own, but we're definitely going to be pushing out some links. So
Cool.
if people forget to, then they can always click on those.
Find out exactly why the movie Young Sherlock Holmes traumatized me as a child.
Well, that's an excellent lead in for that. So that's what people should read. But where should they find you online? If they want to follow you, keep up to date, that kind of thing.
Well, 2 places. I'm very active on Twitter, so that's at Kit Gonzo. It's a bit of a fire hose. There will be politics, so if lefties ranting about the state of the world doesn't appeal to you, I understand. Don't feel obligated, but if you can stomach that, there's also all the other stuff. I tweet out a lot, slightly too much. So that's a good place to follow me and keep up to date. If you're really interested in my work and you're interested in making a very small financial contribution to keep me going, you can go to patreon.com/KitPower. Now, $1 a month as a pledge will get you something new from me every week. That new thing could be a short story, it could be an essay, it could be a book review, or it could indeed be a podcast, because I'm involved in several podcasts as well. And the Patreon backing will give you access to a mixture of exclusive material and early access to, I mean, pretty much everything I write, actually. So that's another good way of keeping track. And if you don't fancy backing, it's still worth following, because I'll do the odd public post there as well, where I keep track of what's going on. I'm sort of using it as an unofficial newsletter until I get off my arse and actually do a newsletter, which I really should do at some point.
You actually do something really interesting with your Patreon, which I noticed when I took a look at it earlier, which is you do a live watch me write at a certain level.
That's right. Yeah. So people back at $3 a month get to watch me write something every week, or at least on aggregate every week. Because obviously I have to balance work life, and sometimes I have to do 2 in a week and then skip a week. But
Sure.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's normally a couple of hours. It's normally, well, it depends. It'll be one of the things I just listed. It'll be an essay, or it'll be a short story, or it might be the chapter of the novel that I've got to work on, whatever I'm doing really. And
it's very brave, I think. This idea of writing, it's so naked, like actually somebody watching your process live. I love the idea of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's 2 things. One of it is it's a spur for me. It keeps me honest. Like I've got to find a 2-hour slot every week, or on aggregate every week, and that's really helpful. But I also, I have a bit of a bugbear about writers who are obscurantist about process. I don't think there is any magical mystery to writing beyond the magical mystery of being human, which admittedly is quite big. But the actual thing of it is you just sit down and write, and there isn't a magic trick to it. And I'm quite keen to kind of I'm quite keen to do anything I can really that helps demystify the process. I mean, as I said at the start, that's part of why I was so jazzed about this cast and so happy to be invited, because I think that's part of what you're doing here, and I really respect that. So yeah, for me, it's actually really incredibly helpful because I'm having to put my money where my mouth is. And just
I really respect it. I think it's fantastic. I think I would struggle, not because of the mystification of it or anything like that, but just this idea of I think I'd become too performative. Like, do you know what I mean? And it
yeah.
like what I put down first, I almost like deliberately make it shit just so I've written something. Do you know what I mean? So I'm sort of there with it, but it's a really cool concept and people should definitely check it out. So go and check out Kit Power on Patreon, patreon.com/KitPower.
I mean, what I will say is that's the only way on the planet you ever get to see a D1 from me, because that's the only time anyone has access to a D1. Because other than that, I'm very protective of my D1s because often they are shit. So I understand what you're saying, but again, for me, part of the process is showing. And one of the things I'll do every now and then for a bonus post is I'll just put in like, okay, so here's a link to the D1 that the live writers got to see. Here's the finished piece.
Mm.
And I did that recently for one of those short stories I wrote, and it was specifically about critical reader feedback. It was like, this is the difference critical readers make. You know, here's the D1 and here's the D3 following 2 rounds of edits.
Oh well, we've really gone around the houses, but in an excellent way. I've absolutely enjoyed my time with you, Kit. It's been phenomenal talking to you about everything. Yeah,
a kindred spirit and tour de force, I'd say.
Excellent. Yeah, spot on.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I had so much fun, and it was a real thrill to revisit my school days of here's a list of 3 titles, pick one and write a story. I haven't done that in a very long time, and it was genuinely, that was probably one of the very few activities at school I ever enjoyed doing. So it was great fun to get to revisit that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for coming on again, and we'll have to. I think we'll have to talk about seeing you again. But for now, I'll say goodbye. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For magnificent beardery, let's cast the Chinicus folliculale spell on Gary Laird. For rich ginger tones on the scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?